Imamate and Congregation 145. It is obligatory for Muslim men who are of sound mind, have reached puberty, are free, and are physically capable of praying in congregation without difficulty to gather and perform the Friday prayer in congregation. And it is wajib for them to perform the Eid prayers. As for performing other obligatory prayers in congregation, it is a strongly recommended sunnah. According to the Maliki school and some Shafi'i scholars, performing other obligatory prayers in congregation, other than the Friday prayer, is also a strongly recommended sunnah. According to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Abu Sawra, Dawud al-Zahiri, and some other jurists, it is obligatory. In this case, it is forbidden for an individual to pray alone. According to Ibn Rushd, Ibn Bishr, and some Shafi'is, however, it is a collective obligation, FARZ-I al-kifaya, in towns. Praying in congregation in every mosque is a sunnah. It is also recommended for an individual to pray alone as part of a congregation. According to the explanations of Hanbali jurists, praying in congregation essentially fulfills both the obligation, wajib, and the sunnah, whether one is resident or traveling. Some also argue that praying in congregation is a personal obligation, FARZ-I AYN 146, in Islam. Great importance is placed on praying in congregation. One should continue to pray in congregation to achieve great reward and to avoid disagreement. The larger the congregation, the greater the virtue. In a hadith, the reward for praying in congregation is 27 times greater than the reward for praying alone, regular. Attendance at congregational prayer is one of the signs of Islam and a mark of faith. Praying in congregation demonstrates the unity and solidarity of Muslims. It fosters a sense of love and solidarity among Muslims, and those who are less knowledgeable benefit from those who are more knowledgeable. It is also more likely that acts of worship and prayers performed in the company of good people will be accepted by Allah. 147. In congregational prayer, the person whom others follow is called the Imam. This person's role is also called Imamet, the act of a person aligning their own prayer with the Imam's. Prayer is called iktida or ittiba. Such a person is also referred to by names such as muktedi, muttabi, or memum. One who prays alone is called a munfarid. 148. The main conditions for imamate are Islam, puberty, sanity, being a man, being able to recite the Quran, and being free from disability. Those who do not possess these conditions cannot be imams. This matter will be understood from the following issues. 149. The most suitable person for imamate among the congregation is the one who knows the Sunnah best, who has knowledge of FIQH. If they are equal in this, it is the one with the most beautiful recitation. If they are equal in this as well, it is the one with the greatest piety, the one who avoids haram the most. If they are equal in these three qualities, it is the one who is older in age. If they are equal in this as well, the one with the better character, the one with a gentler disposition and greater modesty takes precedence. If they are equal in this regard as well, the one with the most beautiful face, then lineage, then voice. And finally, the one whose attire is the cleanest. If equality is to be accepted among all of them, a lottery is held among them. All this demonstrates the great importance attached to the office of imam. This is why, in the past, administrators would take on this duty in the places where they resided. However, if there is a host or the official imam of that place among the congregation, they are given preference. Even if they do not possess all the required qualifications, they are still preferred. Anyone who is to lead prayer in another's home does so with the homeowner's permission. Similarly, anyone intending to pray alone in another's home must also seek the homeowner's permission. This is the virtuous course of action. 150. The imamate of a sinner, one who openly commits haram acts, and one who introduces innovations, one who mixes non-religious matters into religious affairs, is severely disliked, makruh, because a sinner is not considered respectful in matters of religion. According to Imam Muhammad and Imam Malik, following such individuals is fundamentally impermissible. The innovator is called a muktedi, meaning one whose beliefs contradict those of the followers of the Sunnah and the community. Following the practitioner of bid'ah is permissible with disapproval only if his beliefs do not lead to unbelief. If their belief leads to unbelief, following them is not permissible even among all Hanafis, such as denying intercession, the torment of the grave, and the guardian angels. 151. It is disliked for slaves and those of unknown paternity to serve as imams, because ignorance is more prevalent among them. If they are knowledgeable, they may serve as imams. A person who is blind in both eyes may also serve as an imam. However, it is more virtuous for sighted people to serve as imams. However, some also argue that it is disliked for a person who is blind in both eyes to lead prayer, because such a person is disabled and may not pay sufficient attention to the cleanliness of their clothing. 152. Just as it is not permissible for men to follow women or children who have not yet reached puberty in prayer, nor for a sane person to follow a mentally disabled person, a Quran reciter to one who cannot recite an illiterate person, one who cannot read to a mute, one whose clothing is clean to one whose clothing is unclean, one whose private parts are covered to one whose private parts are exposed, one without a disability to one with a disability. Nor is it permissible for one person with a disability to follow another with a different disability. However, it is permissible for those with the same excuse to follow one another. 153. A woman leading prayer for other women is permissible, although disliked, if women are the praying congregation among themselves. The woman who will lead the prayer stands among them and does not go in front of them. This stepping ahead is also disliked. 154. It is permissible for one who has washed their feet during abdus to follow one who has rubbed their feet, for one who has taken abdus to follow one who has performed tayammum, for one who prays standing to follow one who prays sitting, or one who stands upright and straight following one who is humped over during ruku is permissible. Imam Ahmad opposes the permissibility of following in the last three cases. 155. It is not permissible for one who is performing an obligatory prayer to follow someone performing a voluntary prayer or another obligatory prayer. However, it is permissible for one performing a voluntary prayer to follow someone performing an obligatory prayer. Example: if a person who has already performed the obligatory noon prayer were to follow an imam leading the noon prayer, the prayer they will perform a second time will be permissible as a voluntary prayer. 156. It is disliked makruh for a person to lead prayer for a congregation that rightfully dislikes him. However, if there is a valid reason for dislike, or if there is nitrogen monoxide one more qualified to lead the prayer, the congregation's dislike is ignored, for in such a case, the congregation's disapproval is unjustified. 157. A change in school of thought does not prevent O&E from following the imam, provided that the person acting as imam observes the conditions and essential elements of prayer. That is to say, even though Muslims may follow different schools of jurisprudence, they are fundamentally one and may therefore follow one another. In this regard, the most virtuous course of action is for every Muslim to follow an imam from their own school of thought. If this is not possible, following any imam from another school of thought who observes the obligatory acts of prayer is more virtuous than praying alone. However, if a Muslim observes that such an imam has something that would invalidate prayer according to his own school of thought, following him is not valid, such as a Hanafi following a Shafi'i who assumes the role of imam without renewing his ablution even though blood is flowing from his nose. According to the Maliki and Hanbali schools, regarding the conditions necessary for the validity of prayer, only the imam's school of thought is considered. The follower's muktedi's school of thought is not taken into account. Therefore, if a Maliki or a Hanbali follows a Shafi'i or a Hanafi imam who has not rubbed the entire head, the prayer is valid, because such a wiping Although IT is not valid in the Maliki and Hanbali schools, it is valid in the Hanafi and Shafi'i schools. 158. The person acting as imam should avoid things that would cause discomfort to the congregation. It is not appropriate for an imam to drag out HI's recitation or do it to the point of boring the congregation. He should adhere to the minimum required level of the Sunnah, for such dragging out causes boredom among the congregation, which is disliked. The reward for a prayer performed in congregation is greater. It is not appropriate to deprive others of this reward. If the congregation consents to the prolongation, it is not disliked. However, it is also disliked for the imam to rush in a way that prevents the congregation from completing the recitations of the ruku and sujud, as well as the tashahhud, in accordance with the sunnah. It is also disliked for the imam to prolong the ruku in order for the congregation to catch up. 159. It is obligatory for the imam to recite the verses and surahs that are easy for him. He should not recite verses he has not yet memorized firmly, nor should he leave room for the congregation to assist him. For example, if the imam makes a mistake in a verse and cannot recall it, the following applies. If he has recited enough to meet the sunnah requirement or to make the prayer valid, he should immediately proceed to ruku. He should not wait for the congregation to correct the mistake. If he has not recited this amount, he should move on to another verse. 160. It is makruh for the imam to lead the prayer while standing at least one arshin higher or lower than the congregation. If some members of the congregation are present with him, it is not disliked. 161. The places of the imam and those following him, the congregation, must be considered as one. If there is a high wall between them that prevents the imam from being seen or his voice from being heard, following that imam is not valid. Also, if there is a distance between the imam and the follower, or between a follower and the row in front, the following is considered. If the prayer is being performed outside the mosque and the distance between them is less than the length of a row, following the imam is valid. However, if the distance is greater than this, following the imam is not valid. However, if the prayer is being performed inside the mosque, the distance between the rows does not prevent following the imam, regardless of its length. However, according to some scholars, in very large mosques, such as the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it is not permissible to stand at the farthest point of the mosque without a connection between the rows and follow the imam. 162. If the imam is on an animal, and those following him are on foot or riding other animals or ships, following the imam is not valid due to the change in location. Similarly, if in a mosque or another place there is a river wide enough for a boat to pass between the imam and the follower, or an empty path between the rows wide enough for a car to drive through, this prevents following the imam. 163. It is disliked, makruh, and disrespectful to walk quickly in order to join the congregation. One must always avoid such behavior. 164. It is not a requirement for the congregation to consist of many people. The merit of praying in congregation can be achieved even with a single person. It is sufficient for the person following the imam to be a woman or a minded child. For this reason, prayer performed in congregation with the family at home is many times more meritorious than prayer performed alone. However, praying in congregation at home without a valid excuse and not going to the mosque is considered a bid'ah and disliked. Merit of prayers performed in congregation in mosques and masjids is greater. See Article 146. 165. A person following the imam in prayer stands to the imam's right. If there are two or more people, they stand behind the imam. This is the proper way to stand without any objection. It is not permissible for the congregation to stand ahead of the imam. In this regard, the position of the feet, not the place of prostration, is taken as the standard. It is sufficient that the heels of the congregation do not extend beyond the imam's heels. According to Imam Malik, although it is makruh for the congregation to stand ahead of the imam, It does not invalidate the prayer. 166. The follower, one who follows the Imam, must intend to follow the Imam, and the obligatory prayer they perform must be the same. Therefore, if a person follows the Imam without intending to do so, or if they wish to pray the noon prayer, but the Imam is leading the afternoon prayer, such following of the Imam is not valid. 167. If the Imam's voice is not loud enough, a member of the congregation should recite the opening and transitional takbirs aloud. When rising from ruku, Rabbina wal lakal, Ham should be said, and the salam should again be given aloud. This is an announcement, a notification. However, when the takbirs are recited, they must be recited as the opening and transitional takbirs. They should not be recited merely for the purpose of announcement. If one does not intend to begin prayer with the first takbir, one who recites it has not begun prayer. If the others are not recited as tasbih, tamid, and transition takbirs, it results in being deprived of reward. Since there is no need for this announcement if the Imam's voice is audible, making this announcement is makruh. Those who act as muaddins should take note of this. 168. The Imam recites the first salam in a louder voice than the second salam, as this is a sunnah for him, for reciting it loudly serves as an announcement to the congregation. The need for this announcement is most often seen in the first salam. 169. When the Imam gives the salam, the follower also gives the salam if he has finished the tashahhud. He does not delay giving the salutation to complete the prayer, salutation and supplication. It is also permissible to give the salutation before completing the tashahhud. 170. When the Imam gives the salutation to both sides after the prayer, he intends the guardian angels and the entire congregation with the words, alaykum. Each member of the congregation, when giving the salutation to the right side, refers to the angels on that side, the congregation, and the Imam if he is on that side or in their own row. When greeting the left side, one greets the congregation and the angels on that side, and if the Imam is on that side, the Imam as well. Those who pray alone also use this salutation to refer solely to the guardian angels. 171 after the congregational salam. Allahumma intesalamu ve mintasalam. Tabarakti ya zelsalali vel ikram. O Allah, you are the source of peace, and peace comes from you. You are free from all defects. Peace in this world and the hereafter is only through your help. You are holy, O possessor of majesty and generosity, my Lord. They remain in their places until this phrase is recited. Then they rise from their places and complete the sunnah or the prayer in another suitable place. Staying in their places beyond this is disliked. It is recommended to break the row after the obligatory part. By doing this, those who arrive later will understand that the prayer has been completed. 172. When the Imam gives the salam, one looks. If the prayer is completed, the Imam is free. He may turn to his right or to his left. In this way, he positions the Qibla to his right or left and sits in that position. If he wishes, he may leave and go about his business. If there is nitrogen monoxide one praying in front of him, he may turn toward the congregation if he wishes. He does not turn and face the one who is praying. For it is disliked to sit facing the one who is praying. However, if the prayer is not yet complete and there is a sunnah prayer to be performed, the Imam says, Allahumma tesalamu ve minkasalam, then stands up and moves to the right, left, forward, or backward to perform that sunnah prayer. If he has no other business to attend to, he may go home and perform this sunnah prayer there, because performing sunnah prayers at home is more meritorious. However, if there is a concern that the congregation might hold a bad opinion of the Imam, the sunnah prayer should be performed without going home. 173. As for those who pray alone, they may remain where they perform their obligatory prayers and may also perform their sunnah prayers there. However, it is better for them to step aside and perform the supererogatory prayers elsewhere. 174. In the obligatory acts of prayer, such as standing, qiyam, bowing, ruku, and prostration, sujud, as well as in supplications and remembrances like the Subhanik, Tasbih, and Tahiyyat. They perform these by following the Imam. However, in the essential act of recitation, which must be performed verbally, the congregation does not follow the Imam. Instead, they listen to the Quran recited aloud by the Imam and remain silent. This is according to Imam Azam and Imam Abi Yusuf. According to these two scholars, just as it is strongly disliked, nearly forbidden, for the congregation to recite aloud in prayers recited aloud, so too is it disliked for the congregation to recite in prayers recited silently. The Imam leads the congregation. Therefore, when the Imam recites, it means the congregation also recites, as it is stated in a holy hadith. For whoever has an Imam, the Imam's recitation is also the recitation for that person. However, Imam Muhammad considered it permissible for the congregation to recite, along with the Imam in prayers where the Quran is recited silently. According to Imam Malik, in prayers where the Quran is recited silently, the follower, one who follows the Imam, also recites silently. This is recommended. According to Imam Ahmad, in prayers where the Quran is recited silently, the follower also recites silently. Furthermore, if no one in the congregation hears the Imam reciting aloud during the prayer, they must also recite. This is obligatory. However, if they can hear it is not permissible for them to recite. They must listen to the Imam, according to Imam Shafi'i. In prayers where the Quran is recited silently, the follower recites verses other than the Fatiha. In prayers where the recitation is done aloud, however, if he will not miss a rak'ah, he recites only the Fatiha silently. 175. If the Imam does not raise his hands while saying the takbir to begin prayer, does not recite the Subhanik, does not recite the ruku and sujud takbirs, does not recite the tasbihs in them, omits saying Sami Allahu liman hamide, omits the tahiyyat and salam, or does not recite the tashrik takbir, the congregation performs these actions. In these 9 matters, the congregation does not follow the Imam. According to Imam Muhammad, if the Imam omits the Subhanik, recites the Fatiha, and then begins the surah, the congregation also does not recite the Subhanik. 176. If the Imam omits the Qunut supplication, the takbirs, the first sitting, the recitation prostration, or the prostration of forgetfulness, the congregation also omits them. If the Imam performs an extra prostration, or recites the takbirs more than the number transmitted by the companions of the Prophet, or recites more than 4 takbirs in the funeral prayer, or stands up for the 5th rak'ah by mistake, the congregation does not follow the Imam in these cases. When the Imam rises for the 5th rak'ah, one looks to see if the Imam has performed the sitting iktida after the 4th rak'ah. The congregation waits while sitting. If the Imam immediately turns and gives the salam without repeating the tashahhud, the congregation also gives the salam with him. However, if the Imam stands up for the 5th rak'ah and goes into prostration, the congregation gives the salam on their own and exits the prayer. If the Imam has not performed the sitting iktida after the 4th rak'ah, the congregation waits again. If the Imam immediately returns from the standing position to the sitting position and gives the salutation, the congregation also gives the salutation along with him. However, if the Imam concludes the 5th rak'ah with a prostration, the prayer of all is void. In this case, it is of no benefit for the congregation to perform the tashahhud and give the salam on their own. 177 in the witr prayer. If the Imam goes into ruku before the congregation has finished the qanat dua, the congregation also goes into ruku. However, if they have not yet recited anything from the qanat dua, they should recite a little enough to avoid missing the ruku with the Imam. 178. If the Imam, in witr prayer, if the Imam forgets the qanat dua and goes into ruku, but the congregation does not follow him, and then the Imam raises his head, recites the qanat dua, and goes back into ruku, and the congregation follows him, the congregation's prayer is void. 179. In prayers performed in congregation, care must be taken to ensure the rows are straight and there are no gaps between them. The imam must also pay attention to this and remind the congregation. The most virtuous row is the first row. Then, as one moves backward, the merit decreases in order. There are many merits to be near the imam. 180. It is disliked, makruh, for a member of the congregation to stand alone behind a row and follow the imam. However, if one cannot find a place to stand between the rows, then it is not disliked. 181. If someone finding the imam in the position of ruku fears that he will miss the rak'ah by going to the first rows to follow the imam, they should move to the last row to follow the imam. They should not stand alone in a single spot without joining any of the rows to follow the imam, even if a rak'ah is missed. 182. It is disliked, makruh, to walk in front of someone who is praying. However, if there is an obstacle such as a curtain, a tree, or a pillar in front of them, it is not disliked. This dislikeness applies to passing in front of the place where the person praying will prostrate in open fields and large mosques. This is because it is difficult to avoid passing in front of the person praying in such large and open spaces. In homes and small mosques, however, passing in front of the one praying unequivocally constitutes a disliked act. A suitor, a barrier such as a wall in front of the imam is sufficient for the congregation as well. This has been explained previously. 183. If one passes in front of a person praying in a higher or lower place, the following is considered. If the person passing by and the one praying come into alignment and face each other, the one passing by has committed a sign. Otherwise, they have not. However, the prayer is never invalidated. According to one opinion, if the passerby's lower half aligns with the prayer's upper half, it is still disliked, such as when a person on horseback passes in front of someone praying on the ground. 184. If the imam realizes after the congregation has dispersed that he led the prayer without being in a state of ritual purity, he must inform the congregation of this as much as possible. According to another opinion, however, there is no need to inform the congregation. 185. It is the right of an imam, according to custom and Islamic law, to temporarily suspend his duties as an imam for up to 1 week per year to visit relatives in the countryside for necessity or to rest. 186. One must continue to attend congregational prayer unless there is a valid excuse. The excuses that make it permissible to skip congregational prayer are illnesses of a severity that would also make dry ablution tayammum permissible, being paralyzed, being too old to walk, being blind, fearing an unjust attack, encountering heavy rain and mud, being in a cold and dark environment, having a patient who requires care and would suffer harm if left alone, and preparing for a journey are among the reasons. Engaging in Islamic studies and writing books, as well as learning and teaching fiqh, are also considered valid excuses. However, it is not permissible to consistently abandon the congregation solely due to these activities. However, anyone who repeatedly abandons the congregation due to negligence or laziness deserves punishment, and their testimony is not accepted. However, whoever leaves the congregation because the imam belongs to the people of innovation does not deserve punishment. Whoever, despite wishing to continue attending the congregation, is prevented from doing so regularly due to a valid excuse, will still receive the reward of the congregation according to their intention.